The United Nations Security Council unanimously approves new sanctions against the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And Pyongyang has a message for Washington. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C., and this is The Heat. The DPRK threatened the United States, saying it would face the, quote, greatest pain following new sanctions imposed by the United Nations. The UN Security Council voted to ban textile exports from the DPRK, restrict oil imports, and end new visas for overseas workers. Monday's resolution comes a week after Pyongyang carried out its 6th nuclear test. China supported the sanctions and is calling for the issue to be resolved through diplomatic means.
China urges the Democratic People's Republic of Korea to take seriously the expectations and the will of the international community to halt nuclear and missile development.
Today's resolution would not have happened without the strong relationship that has developed between President Trump and Chinese President Xi, and we greatly appreciate both teams working with us.
Let's get to our panel right now. Joining us from Beijing is Qinduo Xu. He's a political analyst for China Radio International. Also with us is Dorothy Parvaz. She's a global policy reporter with ThinkProgress. From New York, we're joined by Morgan Muchnick. He's a Republican strategist and founder of the M2 Group, a public and government affairs firm. And Afshin Molavi is a senior fellow with the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Qinduo Xu, let me start with you, and let's start with the DPRK, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and the nuclear issue. As we've just heard, new sanctions imposed on the DPRK, passed unanimously in the United Nations Security Council. Is this going to make any difference at all?
Well, I think if you look at the passage of this latest resolution, basically there's a unanimity of the international community, the UN Security Council members. So I think it's a strong message to the North Korean government that their behavior, their violation of related UN resolutions is against the will of the international community. They'd better take that into consideration for their next behavior, for their policies. Secondly, I think, with this unanimity, you have more countries participating in the resolutions or imposing sanctions against North Korea. Usually, the more participants, the more effective the sanctions will be. And thirdly, I don't think, North Korea will change their heart overnight. But as time goes on, remember, a lot of the sanctions, it will take time to produce the desired results. The pressure on North Korea to stop the nuclear tests and missile tests and also coming to the negotiating table. But, like more than $750 million of textile products, the revenue, it is the outcome, the calculation of the year's trade. So it takes a lot of time to produce the results. So I think we will see the results probably gradually, but not overnight.
Right, Dorothy, if we look at what is going on here in Washington on this DPRK issue, there's a lot of threatening noises coming out of the White House, especially President Trump saying that these sanctions are nothing compared to what will have to happen. And we also had a comment from Senator John McCain. Let's take a listen to what the senator had to say. Let's watch.
Obviously, China can put the brakes on Kim Jong-un. So far, they have not. In fact, in some ways, they've increased their assistance. But the other is to make it clear that we really have two choices. One, accept that or have a nuclearized region. The third option is that we've got to do along with it is missile defense, capabilities to defend Korea. In other words, make sure that Kim Jong-un knows that if he acts in an aggressive fashion, the price will be extinction.
So we have John McCain there talking about extinction. Is this just bluster? I mean, can the United States afford another war against what is effectively a nuclear state?
Well, it doesn't seem that that would be a smart course of action. One doesn't declare war to ostensibly prevent a nuclear war. I mean, that's what's going to happen. So I do think that North Korean leadership is aware that the U.S. can and does have the capability, but they're also banking on the fact that they won't go for the military option, right? We have 11 years of sanctions, 9 rounds. To what effect? They know that they can push forward, and they're doing it. They very effectively bought themselves time. As the senator said, we're running out of time, right? So, and as your previous guest said, you know, if it's going to take about a year maybe for these sanctions to have any impact. Do we have a year?
Okay, let me go to Morgan on this. Morgan, let me bring you in on this. Is it perhaps time for the United States to put the threats aside and go all along the route of diplomacy?
Well, first, let me say it's nice to be here, and I am pleasantly surprised that actually I think all of the guests here are in agreement. I think diplomacy is the only option. The problem is Republicans and Democrats alike, for the time immemorial, for decades now, have played the same game with North Korea. And I think your last speaker was correct. There's really no fear. They don't really truly believe, even President Trump would actually do a preemptive war against a nation like North Korea. So that's why it's a terribly challenging situation in which we find ourselves, because there is truly no elegant solution to this. The diplomacy is great. The United Nations passing unanimously the sanctions is great. Is that going to be enough to really change the course and take us off a path away from war? No. But it's fine. I just don't think this North Korean leadership really cares a heck of a lot.
I'm wondering, Morgan, because something that has been underreported here in the United States is the fact that the DPRK is interested in negotiations. I mean, we've heard that the DPRK will not discuss its nuclear weapons, but it's always prefaced that statement by saying if the United States stops acting in a hostile way, if the United States stops with its nuclear threats, then we're prepared to talk.
Well, if that's true, that's great. The irony, of course, is that if that does work, it'll be because this administration has chosen to go a different path from both Republican and Democratic presidents alike up until this point, which basically acquiesced to North Korean demands. Possibly a more aggressive tone may actually end up proving fruitful from the point of view of America, or basically the civilized world.
Afshin, what options do countries like the United States have?
The options are very, very limited, Anand. You know, when you look at North Korea today, I mean, take these sanctions that we've seen. North Korea's economy is small, and this is not a regime that has shown a great regard for its own people. So you know, when you sanction textiles, when you sanction oil imports and that sort of thing, look, sanctions are a blunt instrument. They're going to hurt North Korean people, people who have already been suffering a great deal under this leadership. Now, if you look at the example another example recently where sanctions were deployed, Iran, right? Iran had a large, oil sector, was exporting gas, had a vibrant civil society that was, occasionally challenging its leadership. And, why are we in this situation? You have none of that in North Korea. In fact, when you have a small economy, limited exports, frankly, the most valuable thing that Kim Jong-un has is his nuclear program. It's not an oil sector, a gas sector, a coal sector, a mineral sector. That's his most valuable thing. So you're going to have to really put a lot more onto the table.
Right, Dorothy, isn't that right? If Kim Jong-un looks around and he sees what happened to Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi having given up his nuclear program at one stage, that is his insurance policy, isn't it?
Right. I mean, it seems like the only lesson that the UN and the US have learned from previous sanctions is more sanctions, from trying to get rid of other nuclear programs. But North Korea also learns lessons. So North Korea doesn't just look at cases like Iraq and Libya where, well, that didn't work in their favor. Where's Saddam? Where's Muammar Gaddafi, right? Look at those countries. They look at Iran, where they did negotiate a deal, where they stopped their program, and now the next president who comes in wants to renegotiate it, calls it the worst deal ever. What's the point of having a deal? They also look at a country like Pakistan, which forged ahead and now has a nuclear program. What happened? Did they get wiped off the map? No, they're there. And they look at Israel, which doesn't have to negotiate with anyone.
Qinduo Xu, getting back to a point you mentioned a moment ago, and that is the fact that this latest sanctions resolution was passed at the United Nations unanimously. The fact that China joined those sanctions, would it be fair to say that even China's patience is wearing thin with the DPRK?
I think the observation is largely right. If you go back a little bit, when Kim Jong-un's father was in power, China made painstaking efforts to bring him to China, to introduce to him the reform and opening up. You can basically remain in power while your country improves national, economically and politically. So, but North Korea's side basically has ignored all the goodwill from the Chinese side. And China is the single most important trading partner for North Korea. But despite China's strong opposition against the nuclear development, the win ahead, especially with this new administration and Kim Jong-un, with the nuclear test, with the missile test. So if you take a look at the response from the Chinese side to the latest round of nuclear test, in the public arena, people are increasingly frustrated with the behavior, with the policy by North Korea, and people fear increasing. I think the fear is growing with what about the contamination of air and the water, because the testing site is so close to China, and the Chinese side basically felt a strong earthquake. So a lot of residents are deeply worried about what's going to happen. So this creates a lot of pressure on the Chinese government. The growing consensus with either Chinese government and the Chinese people is we have to do more to basically tell the North Korean side, sorry, this is unacceptable. You have to change your behavior. Of course, we are not sure North Korea will change the behavior, given the reasons the other guests have said earlier.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think China has this. It's not only about the U.S., South Korea. It's also about China and Russia. All have expressed a strong opposition against them.
Okay, let's move on to the next issue at this roundtable, and that is the travel ban. About which we've been hearing a lot. It's been moving from one court to the other. The latest thing that's happened is that the Supreme Court intervened for just a day, restored the travel ban. Dorothy, what is the status of this ban right now?
It's not really in place right now. So as it stands, it's not really in effect.
So does that mean that people from these 6 Muslim majority countries that Donald Trump tried to ban from coming to the United States unless they had very close family here can now?
Yeah, it appears to be. I mean, we're not hearing stories about people being stopped at the airport right now.
Right.
But I think a lot of people are also not traveling because they're afraid of problems. They're afraid of being detained. They're afraid of, so they're putting off plans.
Right, and it could change while you're flying.
It could definitely change while you're flying. One tweet could change everything.
Right.